Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and what I've got in my hands is the newest of my red wiggler worm bins. I'm bringing it up here to the bench because it's been 14 days now since I launched this bin with a worm population. In fact, I've actually been in here once since then to add even more worms. But after 14 days, I think it's due for its first feeding. And for that, I've come prepared with a number of things from the kitchen. It's a whole variety of really fine chopped little itsy bitsy kitchen scraps. I actually went to the bottom of the bag to get a whole bunch of the really fine stuff. You can even see there's some little bits of crystallized ice chunks in there too. Little frost was starting to develop inside that collection of food. And the other stuff that you'll pretty readily recognize since it's still in the filter is the coffee. I've even got a couple spare coffee filters here. And besides feeding, I'm also going to include a little bit of the grit that I sometimes apply with my feedings. It's just pulverized eggshell because the grit helps the worms digest the food that they're given. So I'm going to go get myself a glove, and then we'll get up close here and see how things are looking in this 2-week-old bin as we apply its first feeding today. Let's get to work. Now, each time I've been into this bin, which was, like I mentioned earlier, for the purposes of adding more worms, I've always used that as an opportunity to get feedback from the viewers on how many worms they thought they saw being released at the time. Because I'll usually try to display the release of the worms in a way that it's really easy to see them all. And I'm trying to remember, I usually take kind of an average of what everyone has provided as far as their guesstimates on the number of worms. So one way or another, I believe that the number, as I've got it recorded in my spreadsheet, which attempts to kind of average the feedback and the estimates that people have provided. I think that the rough estimate for how many worms I've got in this system is somewhere around 1,600. But it's not easy to guess. I mean, even if you're going so far as to weigh the worms, and if you use the rough numbers that most people accept as true, which is that a pound of worms equates to about 1,000 count, even then it's it's hard to sense how accurate you're getting as far as the count is concerned. So here in a brand new bin, it's fair to expect that you're going to see a lot of chunks of the bedding, leaves, everything that was used to build the bin. I usually try to use a more natural type substance to cover the top surface of my bins, such as a scattering of leaves. But you usually don't have to go very far to make your way down to a whole bunch of other types of materials that I use. A lot of cardboard, in the bottom portions. And then just an attempt to make things a little more natural by scattering leaves across the top. And in this bin, when I built the bin, and I built the bin with a pretty good amount of food inside, so I do count that as the population having received its first feeding, just by them being placed into the system. The food that was used to build the system counts as their first feeding. So what we're giving them is really the first feeding since the worms have been introduced into the system, but I count it as feeding number 2. The moisture level, even on the corners, out on the edges everywhere, feels pretty decent. That covering that you saw in the beginning, that sheet of cardboard wrapped in the pink plastic bag, really does a great job keeping the moisture down within the system. But before we feed, I figured I would just take a quick spot check in a number of different places within the bin to see how things are looking. And I guess the far outer corners are usually a good place to judge the general well-being of a system, because that's usually where there's the greatest amount of air kind of sneaking by my coverings, usually equating to a somewhat drier space, which you would not expect to see too many worms hanging out in. But as you saw right there, that corner is doing quite nicely. So it's not like a dry no man's land as far as worms are concerned. Even out here in this corner, the material does seem a little bit more flaky and dry, but I definitely saw 1 or 2 worms there in the process. So we'll return these little guys back to where they were in this corner. My guess is that they were down really low. I think I had to scoop pretty low to reach worms. Because maybe the stuff on the surface is a little bit dry, but no, I don't think so. It looks that way just because of the way it flakes apart, but I can feel the coolness of the moisture on my fingertips as I rummage around. So I guess we're going to feed down the middle, but what the heck, let's kind of follow through here with checking out all the corners. Checking the corners has sort of been my theme lately, because I was feeding all of my red wiggler systems by positioning each new feeding in a different corner, alternating on each occasion. So I've almost sort of gotten into this habit of checking the corners. I wonder if that's why I'm doing it here. Maybe it was just force of habit. But as long as we've gone to all three other corners, it would only seem fair to check this corner as well. And in this corner, geez, look at all the, it just seems like there's way more castings down in this corner than in the other corners. And as you would expect, hand in hand with all those castings is a pretty good number of worms there. So maybe that corner received some sort of a really delicious piece of food or something, I don't know, when I built the bin originally. Or maybe there's some other thing about that corner that's drawing the worms in. And you can see I've used leaves, meaning along with the leaves comes these huge leaf stems. And they're going to take a little while to break down, but that's fine. This bin is brand new. We got lots of time for things to happen in here. Down the middle, again, you could see the material is pretty flaky and seemingly dry, but you might even hear it kind of crumbling and cracking a little bit as I run my fingers through it. But the stuff is, once again, I could tell you, nice and cool and damp. Maybe could use a little bit more moisture, but guess what? When we put all that food in here, which is going to go right down here in the middle, all that food is going to bring with it a good amount of moisture as well. So I guess you do have to go down pretty low, which is where you're going to find the greatest number of worms. I must have really saturated this stuff at the very bottom nicely, making everything nice and damp and cozy. As you can see, everything's got like a little glisten to it. Everything's got a nice degree of moisture to it. And I saw tons of leaves and paper everywhere, but I can't say for sure that I saw any distinguishable chunks of leftover food in here as we were poking around. I mean, I'll admit I wasn't necessarily looking for it either, but if I did stumble on anything other than paper and cardboard and leaves, I think we probably would have maybe said something. So it is possible that over the past 2 weeks, the worms have more or less depleted the food supply that they were given. So it seems like an opportune time for them to be getting more now. Just wondering if... it's pretty moldy, whatever it is, but it just looks like more bedding and cardboard and stuff. So who knows? Maybe they did actually do away with all the food that they were given. So I'm glad I'm in here to feed. I wasn't sure how long I should wait for the first feeding, but it does seem like a good time at this point. So I'm just going to roughly put in half into one of these little paper bundles, coffee filters. See if I can get the other half shoved into this other one. And then I guess these larger bits, maybe we could just kind of spread these out across the top, and you know, maybe we can even spread some of this coffee out across the top too. Throw a little bit here, throw a little bit there. Try to jam it all down so it's not poking out the top surface. And then we can spread these banana peels out across the top. It seems like a pretty nice feeding, pretty generous actually. I would say that that application of grit is also fairly generous. So this should be a really popular spot for the worms, as all this stuff, really fine little bits of food scraps all begin to melt. They're going to all kick off a nice amount of moisture. It's going to really dampen the feeding area. That's just going to become a magnet for the worms, especially if the food supply is dwindling as it appears to be. This should be a pretty popular spot because of all the food as well. Look at all this nice stuff. I mean, it's definitely a lot of leaves and everything, but it's just so cool to see so many castings sprinkled around within the material. Although it's like I tell some people when I'm checking out my newest bin for the first time, like we're doing here, a lot of these castings on the surface might very well have just come over with the worms at the time of the bin being populated. Because oftentimes I'll go to a greater extent to try to really separate the castings from the worms, leave the castings with the harvest, and just bring over the worms if possible. But I didn't really take that much care to do so here. So a good amount of castings, if I remember correctly, did come over with the worms when they came into here. So a lot of this stuff scattered across the top might have just not been created here, but came over. So in the very beginning, it's a little deceiving, but it is kind of a cool thing. You notice that right when you first notice it, you're like, yeah, all right, look at all those castings. And it's pretty easy to forget that they may not have actually been created here. But some of them were, for sure. And I believe that that's it. It's a pretty new bin. Not a lot of interesting stuff happening yet. It's still a whole lot of bedding everywhere. So I look forward to seeing things gradually improve in here. See all the bedding and the little leaf stems all vanish over time. And with a 1,600 population bin, we should see pretty good action in here. At least I would hope so. And I've still got other worms coming out of that system where these worms came from. So there could potentially be one more slight increase to the number of worms that are going to eventually make up the population of this bin. So we'll see. I'm not sure yet what I'm going to do with that last batch of worms that need to be hauled out of their current environment. So, all right, everyone, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this quick check-in with my newest red wiggler bin at 14 days of age, getting its first feeding after the launch of the worms. So if you did enjoy the video, as I hope you did, please remember to leave me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. Also, consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.